For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and trading with them, made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please pray with me. May the words of my lips and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, when I visited medieval churches in Franconia, I was struck by the quality of the stone carving that decorated the altars and the side chapels and even the pillars along the nave. But the most elaborate carvings were most often reserved for just over the western front door. There, above these main entrances, were fearsome depictions of the final judgment. Christ, seated on the judgment throne, top center, with a 2-edged sword in his mouth, and on his right, those who were among the righteous, headed off to glory, accompanied by angels. And on his left, those who were roasting in a river of fire, on their way to being devoured by a monstrous mouth that represented hell. And it was hard to shake that image even once you entered the glorious interior of the church. Now let me ask you, why would the builders of these beautiful churches want this scene to be the last thing you saw before entering worship? Perhaps to inspire humility and self-reflection, so that the faithful would continually pray to be on the right hand of Christ with the righteous rather than burning in torment. Now, at worst, this seems rather self-serving to me, praying for one's own salvation and safety while others suffer in horrific torment. I mean, it's not unlike those today who seem primarily interested in getting out of a dirty world and into a clean heaven, and largely uninterested and unaffected by anything or anyone else. A rather selfish version of the faith, if you ask me. But at best, such emphasis on the Last Judgment can be a powerful reminder that the way things are presently is not how they always will be. That God has not given up on His creation, and that ultimately there will be a reckoning and things will be set right. For this reason, the dread day of the Lord rightly deserves our attention, and both our Bible readings from Zephaniah and the Apostle Paul call us to such attention. The prophet names torments that are all too real: wrath, destruction, ruin and devastation, battle cries, and the leveling of cities. And it's not like such descriptions seem manufactured or even far off. I mean, such images are all too evident in the Ukraine, in Syria, in Iraq, in Ebola wards in West Africa, and in countless cities around the world racked by the fiery destruction of war or the slow decay of chronic and systemic poverty. Days of torment and destruction greet us each and every time we turn on the television or flip on the radio or open a newspaper or log into our home web pages and the news comes up. But what have our days of destruction to do with the day of the Lord? Are these signs of the end times, or just the unfortunate but normal, even perennial, exercises of human powers rather than God's judgment upon these very powers? What is the link between God's judgment and the destruction that we see? On the one hand, with the eyes of faith and the benefit of historic hindsight, we do glimpse God's judgment on unrighteousness when unholy regimes are overthrown, like Pharaoh in Egypt, or the pagan Roman Empire, or the Nazis in World War II, or apartheid in South Africa, or Pol Pot in Cambodia. Our faith is built on the confidence that divine righteousness has broken into human history in the past, and that it will ultimately prevail over all oppressive systems fueled by power-hungry humanity. And so the faithful hope, as the faithful have always hoped, that God will intervene, that the Lord will indeed come in power and judgment to save, to set things right. And yet this hope is hard to sustain. Empires rise and fall. Plague and famine never really seem to go away. There are wars and rumors of war, and nothing seems to change. Not really. God's intervention may be promised, but the inbreaking of God's judgment is hard to spot. The Lord's justice is hard to see. But notice, the Apostle Paul writes, "You, beloved, you are not in darkness for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are children of the light and children of the day." And that is the key. We are already children of the day. The day of the Lord is not just past deliverance or some future event, but also the day in which we already live, presently, the one in which Jesus has already come to expose our sin, our power-hungry, turned in on themselves ways, and to lead us into a new way of living that refuses to participate in such destruction, that refuses to be held in bondage to this passing age and its systems of power and coercion. How we respond to those German stone carvers' depictions, and perhaps more importantly, to these Bible passages on the coming judgment, tell us much of how we understand ourselves and how we understand God. Notice, the people of Zephaniah's day see God as distant, ineffectual, and uninvolved. The Lord will not do harm, nor will the Lord do good. A do-nothing God. A God who really doesn't matter. And so their lives are largely unaffected by God's character and God's righteousness, and thus, when God's judgment does come, they are swept away unawares. And in an age of ever-increasing gap between the rich and the poor in our own country, the words, "Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them," sound out with special relevance. I mean, how many people today believe that God, if God even exists, that God hasn't, will not intervene? They think God is ineffectual, and so their faith is ineffectual, and they put their trust in other things. Likewise, in Matthew's parable of the talents, what the servants think they know about their master largely determines what they do. Did you notice that? The slave who goes and buries his money and so has no return to show for his master does so because he sees his master as a hard, harsh man, reaping where he did not sow, gathering where he did not scatter. And so he's afraid. He's afraid. And so he does nothing. The other slaves see their master as creative, even empowering. They appreciate the huge amount of money he has entrusted to them. Remember, a talent would be worth $375,000 in today's money, at the very least. So the first slave is given well over $1 million. And the second one, way over $500,000. Imagine that. And they respond by investing wisely and producing a generous return. In just that way, what we know about God's character through Jesus Christ should inform our daily lives. How God does not want us to sit back and play it safe, but go out and risk what's been entrusted to us for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of God's mission. So while the backdrop of this story is the master's delayed return, he went away for a long, long time, the story itself gives us a powerful image of what it means to be faithful in the meantime. It is a reminder to us of what the church is really about. The congregation we belong to does not belong to us. It belongs to the Master, who's going to return someday. So our job is to take the assets that belong to the Master and use them wisely in mission. And so we should not think of this building and the congregation's resources and even our own individual time and talent and treasure as our own, because they are not. They belong to the Master. They are only a loan to us. And if any of you dispute that, then have this conversation with me in 100 years. They belong to the Master. So no, we should not think of our resources as our own to jealously guard and hoard, but rather to do the work that the one day returning Master wants us to do with what He has entrusted to us. So all this talk about the end of time and the day of the Lord and the coming judgment should be motivational. No, not in terms of quick, everybody look busy, Jesus is coming back, or you better straighten up, or you'll be caught unawares and end up weeping and gnashing your teeth. No, but in terms of God's certain intervention and the sincere desire to make that future hope a present reality among us, to risk and share, to dare and care, so that God might use what we have to the very best of our abilities, even as we leave the ultimate outcome up to divine providence. And in just this way, these Bible readings are not here to terrify us, to threaten us, to cajole. They are here to remind us to take ourselves and our lives as God's people in this world seriously, intentionally, productively. We each have gifts from God to use in this world. And whether we double the investment or not, we will bear witness to the one who is coming, point to the new age about to dawn, and thus help bring others into the light. And may it be so. Amen.